So I don't know if you've ever wondered, but why does God take us into storms? And by storms, I mean the various hardships and difficulties and circumstances that we often find ourselves within. Now, to answer this question, we're going to look at an account written by a New Testament author whose name was Mark, and hopefully learn some of the lessons that God wants us to learn as we navigate storms together. As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." And I see two things here. As evening came, there's a sense in which our lives can become darker and darker and darker. And then we see Jesus said, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." And so Jesus is the one who leads his 12 disciples here into the context of a storm without them even realizing it. The storm is God's doing. Leaving the crowd behind them, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. Often when we find ourselves in storms, we think that it's just us going through it. But actually, there were also other boats with him. When you interact with other people, it's important to be sensitive and to know that other people are also going through various storms. The text goes on and says, a huge storm came up. Some versions say, suddenly a storm came up and waves started pouring into the boat, threatening to sink it. Now, I don't know what this represents for you, but suddenly out of nowhere, these 12 disciples found themselves in this huge storm. For you, it might be navigating a retrenchment or the loss of someone close to you, a parent or a loved one. It might be health challenges. But suddenly, a huge storm came up. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves in a context where we feel completely out of control. It's amazing that in this account, we see that Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. Sometimes we find that God is fast asleep while we find ourselves navigating the storm. God, where are you? What are you doing? Why does it feel as though you're just asleep? The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown? Don't you care if we perish?" Now, what I see here is the freedom for us to express our emotions. Here we see anguish in the 12 disciples. Maybe there's anger, "Don't you care?" Or maybe there's anxiety, "Don't you care?" But what we see is the freedom for us to express our emotions. You see, often I find that the thing that we do when it comes to our anxieties and our anguish is that we want to medicate those emotions, and we medicate them in a variety of ways. And God is saying, instead of medicating these things, it's to be raw and to be real and to bring them to God and to find Jesus in the midst of the emotions. The account goes on and says, when Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." And suddenly the wind stopped and there was a great calm. This is amazing to me, that the one who spoke creation into being, with his very words, he brings about calm in the circumstances that these disciples find themselves in. And this is what he does for us today, with his word, by his promises, as he speaks to us over and over in the midst of our storms. That's where we experience and find a real sense of calm. And then he turns to the disciples and he asks them two questions. He asks, "Why are you afraid?" And that's a really great question to answer. Why are you afraid? In the midst of your storm, what's making you so scared? It's so important for us to name and to label these things, to really have a grasp and understand what are the triggers, what's the source of our fear. The second question he asks, do you still have no faith? You see, in the context of a storm, we feel completely out of control. And here the question is, are you still not going to rely on me? Are you not going to trust me to navigate you out of this? You see, I'm a control freak, and when I find myself in a boat that is out of control, I try and save myself. I try and come up with strategies to get myself out of this scenario. And often it is only within the context of a storm that I realize, that maybe you realize, what we've really been trusting in, what we've really been relying on. And when the disciples saw Jesus do this for the first time, when they saw God intervene in their circumstances, when they saw God speak and bring about calm, this is what the account says. The disciples were absolutely terrified. There's a version that says they feared a great fear. They feared a greater fear. They feared God more than they feared the storm and the suffering and the circumstances that they found themselves within. And they asked this question, who is this man, they asked each other, that even the wind and the waves obey him? You see, it is only within the context of a storm, of suffering, of the various trials that we often find ourselves within, that we ask that question, who is this man? When we see God intervene, when we see God in control, when we see God wake up and act on our behalf, it is only at that point do we realize that He is the Lord of the storm. You see, God identifies with us in our various boats. He is a God who does care deeply. In fact, Jesus navigated the greatest storm recorded in history. He too asked His Father from the cross, "Why have you forsaken me? Why don't you care?" He trusted God even to the point of death. And then His Father resurrected Him. And can you imagine the 12 disciples seeing Him at that point after that huge storm of Golgotha? I think that there was a greater calm than had ever been before. And because of the resurrection, and because God identifies with us in our boats, we can experience that very same calm because of the resurrected Lord, the true Lord of the storm.